The year is 1285. In the heart of rural England, where the rhythm of life is dictated by the sun and the seasons, a new day begins. For the vast majority of people in the Middle Ages, life was an endless cycle of toil and subsistence, played out on the land they neither owned nor truly controlled. These were the peasants, the backbone of a feudal society, their existence intertwined with the earth, their fate bound to the harvest. Our journey begins in a small, unassuming village of Oakhaven, a cluster of wattle and daub huts nestled amidst a patchwork of open fields. As the first tendrils of dawn paint the eastern sky in hues of gray and faint rose, a chill still clings to the air. Inside a humble dwelling, barely more than a single room, the embers of last night's fire offer a weak, flickering defiance against the encroaching cold. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke, damp earth, and unwashed bodies. This is the home of Thomas, a man in his late 20s, strong and weathered beyond his years, and his wife Ilara, whose hands are already calloused from a lifetime of labor. Their 3 young children, barely stirring, huddled together on a straw-filled pallet, wrapped in coarse wool blankets, seeking comfort in shared warmth. Life began early, long before the sun cleared the horizon. There was no luxury of leisure, no indulgence in extra sleep. Survival demanded constant vigilance and relentless effort. The first task of the day, even before greeting the meager light, was to rekindle the fire. Ilara would carefully uncover the banked embers, blowing gently on them, coaxing them back to life with dry kindling gathered the day before. The spark, when it finally caught, was not just a source of warmth or a means to cook. It was a symbol of life itself, a continuity from one arduous day to the next. Without fire, there was no cooked meal, no boiled water, no protection from the biting cold of winter. As the flames grew, casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls, the small household would begin to stir. Thomas would rise first, his joints stiff from the night's rest on a hard bed of straw. He would stretch, his muscles aching in anticipation of the day's work. His clothes, simple tunic and breeches of undyed wool, were the same ones he wore yesterday and likely the day before. Cleanliness was a luxury few could afford, and bathing was a rare, communal event in a nearby stream when the weather permitted. The concept of personal hygiene, as we know it, simply did not exist. Ilara would fetch water from the village well, a task she undertook daily, regardless of the weather. The heavy wooden bucket, usually shared amongst several families, was a constant reminder of the physical demands placed upon women. She would often exchange a few hushed words with other women already at the well, sharing news of a sick child, a broken tool, or the latest rumor from the manor house. These brief interactions were vital threads in the tapestry of village life, reinforcing bonds of community and shared hardship. As the sun's first rays finally broke through the small, unglazed window opening, filtering dust motes in the air, the world outside their door began to awaken, beckoning them to another day of unyielding labor. With the fire rekindled, the morning routine quickly shifted to the preparation of the day's first and often most substantial meal. For Thomas, Ilara, and their children, breakfast was not a varied spread of delicacies, but a simple, hearty porridge, a staple that provided much-needed energy for the arduous hours ahead. Ilara would measure out a handful of coarse grain, often oats or barley, which had been ground at the village mill, a communal necessity for all peasants. She would mix it with water, sometimes adding a little milk if their single scrawny cow had given any that morning, and let it simmer slowly over the open flame in a simple earthenware pot. The aroma, though humble, was a comforting presence signaling the start of the day. While the porridge cooked, Thomas would attend to their few animals. Their small plot of land, typically a scattering of strips across the Lord's open fields, also supported a few pigs, some chickens, and perhaps that one weary cow. These animals were not pets, they were essential assets, providing milk, eggs, meat for special occasions, and most importantly, manure for the fields. As the children, once fully awake, would begin their own tasks, the elder boy, only 7 or 8 years old, might be tasked with fetching more firewood from the small stack outside, or helping his mother carry water. The younger children, still too small for heavy labor, would mostly stay close to Ilara, learning by observation, absorbing the patterns of peasant life. There was no formal schooling for these children. Their education was practical, learned through participation in the daily chores, preparing them for the same life of labor their parents endured. By the time the porridge was ready, thick and steaming, the entire family would gather around the hearth. There were no tables or chairs in their hut, only low wooden stools or the earthen floor itself. Each person would receive a wooden bowl, perhaps a horn spoon, and they would eat in relative silence, the sounds of chewing and the gentle slurping of porridge filling the small space. Conversation, when it occurred, was pragmatic, a brief discussion about the day's work in the fields, the state of the weather, or any pressing concern. This meal was not a time for leisure, but a necessary refueling, a brief pause before the hard physical work began. After the meal, Thomas would prepare his tools. A heavy wooden plough, perhaps tipped with iron if he was fortunate, would need checking. His hoe and sickle, handmade and precious, would be sharpened on a rough stone. These tools were extensions of his body, vital instruments in his endless battle against the earth. Ilara, meanwhile, would pack a small parcel of bread and perhaps some dried cheese for their midday meal in the fields, along with a small skin of water or thin ale. As the sun finally climbed higher, casting longer shadows across the dewy fields, the family would emerge from their hut, ready to face the demands of another day under the feudal system. They were bound to the land, to their lord, and to the ceaseless rhythm of agricultural life, their individual wills subservient to the collective needs of the manor. The heart of peasant life lay in the open fields, vast swaths of land divided into unfenced strips, each family holding a number of these scattered parcels. This was the arable land of the manor, cultivated communally, but worked individually. Thomas and Ilara would spend the majority of their waking hours here, under the unforgiving gaze of the sun or the biting lash of the wind and rain. Today, the task is plowing, a back-breaking endeavor that demanded immense physical strength and endurance. Thomas would harness his single ox, a slow but powerful beast, to the heavy wooden plough. The earth, still damp from the morning dew, resisted with a stubborn tenacity. Each furrow turned was a testament to his grit, his muscle straining with every step. The strip system, though seemingly inefficient to modern eyes, was designed to ensure fairness. Each family received a share of good and bad land, preventing any single family from monopolizing the most fertile ground. But it also meant countless hours walking between strips, adding to the already immense workload. As Thomas guided the plough, his hands gripping the handles, his gaze fixed on the earth, Elara would follow, often with the older child. Her role was equally vital, breaking up clods of soil with a hoe, removing weeds, or scattering seeds by hand if it was planting season. The work was endless, repetitive, and utterly exhausting. The fields were a microcosm of the village itself. Other peasants would be working nearby, their figures bent over the soil, engaged in similar struggles. The air would be filled with the sounds of their labor, the grunts of men, the occasional shout to an ox, the rhythmic thud of a hoe hitting compacted earth, the rustle of straw as seeds were sown. There was a camaraderie born of shared hardship, an unspoken understanding of the struggle they all faced against the elements and the constant threat of hunger. Yet despite the collective effort, each family knew their own survival depended on their individual sweat and diligence. Beyond the immediate physical demands, the peasants' work was also a gamble. The success of the harvest depended entirely on the fickle hand of nature. Too much rain and the crops would rot, too little and they would wither. A sudden hailstorm could flatten a season's worth of effort in minutes. Pests, blight, and disease were constant threats. Every seed sown was an act of faith, every successful harvest a profound relief, and every failed one a direct threat to life itself. There was little margin for error and no safety net beyond the community and the Lord's grudging charity. The sun would climb to its zenith, beating down mercilessly. At midday they would pause for a brief respite. Their meal, brought from the hut that morning, a hunk of stale bread, perhaps a piece of hard cheese or an onion, was eaten quickly, without ceremony, often in the shadow of a hedgerow or a solitary tree. There was no time for extended breaks. The earth demanded constant attention, and the day's light was a precious commodity that could not be wasted. As they resumed their labor, the afternoon sun would intensify the heat, and the earlier aches would morph into a dull, persistent throb throughout their bodies. This was the reality of their existence, a relentless dance with the soil, dictated by ancient rhythms and the unyielding demands of survival. While the fields provided the means for survival, the peasant's life was not truly their own. Above them sat the lord of the manor, the landowner to whom they were bound by an intricate web of feudal obligations. The manor house, often a modest stone or timber dwelling, stood as a constant reminder of this hierarchy, a silent but imposing presence dominating the village landscape. It was from here that the lord, or his bailiff, administered justice, collected rents, and enforced the intricate rules that governed every aspect of peasant life. Thomas and Elara, like all other peasants in Oakhaven, were villeins or serfs, tied to the land. They could not leave the manor without the lord's permission, nor could their children marry without his approval. In exchange for the right to cultivate their strips of land and receive the Lord's protection, they owed him a substantial portion of their labor and produce. This was their rent, paid not in coin, which was scarce, but in sweat and harvests. Beyond working their own strips, peasants were obliged to dedicate several days a week, often 2 or 3, to working the Lord's domain, his private lands. This was unpaid labor, known as week work. Imagine Thomas, after spending hours on his own fields, then having to shift his efforts to the Lord's land, knowing that every furrow turned there contributed solely to the Lord's wealth, not his own family's sustenance. He might be tasked with plowing, sowing, harvesting, or repairing fences on the domain, all under the watchful eye of the reeve or bailiff. This was an inescapable duty, often performed with less enthusiasm than their own work, but performed nonetheless, for refusal meant severe punishment or even expulsion from the manor, a fate akin to a death sentence. In addition to week work, there were boom days or precaria, extra days of labor demanded by the Lord during peak seasons such as harvest or haymaking. These were the most crucial times, when every available hand was needed, and the Lord's demands often took precedence over the peasants' own fields. The church, too, exerted its own financial claim, demanding a tithe, a tenth of all produce from every family. This God's tax further reduced the peasants' already meager yield, leaving them with just enough to scrape by if they were lucky. The Lord's authority extended beyond labor. Peasants were obligated to use the Lord's mill to grind their grain, paying a fee in flour. They used the Lord's oven for baking, paying with a portion of their bread. Even the inheritance of their land strips upon a father's death required a payment to the Lord, known as a heriot, often the best beast from the family's livestock. These payments, large and small, chipped away at any surplus, ensuring that the peasant remained perpetually dependent and just above the line of destitution. Their lives were a constant negotiation between their own needs and the demands of their feudal master, a delicate balance maintained by tradition, fear, and the unyielding structure of medieval society.
After a long day of unremitting toil, as the sun began its descent, Thomas and Ilara would make their way back to their humble dwelling. Their home was not a place of comfort as we understand it today, but a basic refuge, a shield against the elements. Typically a one-room structure built from local materials, wattle, woven branches, and daub, a mixture of mud, clay, and straw for the walls, and a thick insulating thatch of straw or reeds for the roof. There was no chimney, just a smoke hole in the roof, meaning the interior was perpetually smoky, contributing to respiratory ailments common among peasants. The floor was packed earth, uneven and cold, covered with a layer of straw that was rarely changed, attracting fleas and other vermin. Furniture was sparse and rudimentary, a few low wooden stools, a rough chest for meager possessions, and straw-filled pallets for sleeping. Privacy was a foreign concept. The entire family, often including elderly relatives, slept, ate, and lived in this single shared space. Warmth came primarily from the central hearth, where a fire was kept burning for the most of the day, serving as both cooker and heater. The smells inside were a potent mix of wood smoke, damped earth, unwashed bodies, and the lingering aroma of whatever simple meal had been cooked. Their diet was equally stark, built around the staple grains they cultivated.
Bread, typically a coarse, dark loaf made from barley or rye, was the absolute cornerstone of every meal, often comprising 70 to 80% of their daily calorie intake. Accompaniments were meager: pottage, a thick stew of vegetables like cabbage, leeks, and onions, sometimes thickened with more grain, a bit of cheese from their cow, or perhaps some foraged berries and nuts in season. Meat was a rare luxury, reserved for feast days or when an animal had to be slaughtered. Pigs were highly valued, but beef was generally too precious, the cows more valuable for milk, cheese, and labor. Their diet was largely vegetarian, dictated by necessity, and often lacking in essential nutrients, making them susceptible to disease and malnutrition. Clean drinking water was also a constant concern, often drawn from communal wells or streams, making sickness a frequent visitor. Clothing reflected the utilitarian nature of their lives. For both men and women, garments were simple tunics, loose-fitting, and made of coarse, undyed wool or linen grown and processed within the village. Thomas would wear a tunic over breeches, while Ilara wore a longer tunic or dress, often with an apron. Shoes, if they had them, were basic leather turn shoes, often crudely made and offering little protection. Children wore miniature versions of their parents' clothes. Garments were mended and patched repeatedly until they were beyond repair, then repurposed as rags. New clothes were a significant investment, often only acquired once or twice a year or for major life events. Life for a peasant was a constant negotiation with scarcity, a testament to resilience in the face of persistent want. The daily struggle was intensely personal, but no peasant lived in isolation. The village was a tight-knit community, a network of interdependence woven from shared ancestry, mutual reliance, and common destiny. Oakhaven, like thousands of other villages across medieval England, was a self-contained world where every face was familiar, every family's triumphs and tragedies known. Life was communal by necessity, a collective effort against the forces of nature and the demands of the feudal system. Cooperation was vital. When a barn needed raising or a communal well repaired, the entire village would come together, pooling their strength and skills. Women would help each other with tasks like spinning wool, brewing ale, or caring for sick children. Men would assist with plowing during busy seasons or share tools too expensive for a single family to own. This mutual aid, known as boon work among neighbors, was not merely charity. It was a fundamental aspect of survival, ensuring that no family, if able-bodied, was left to falter alone. A strong community was a resilient community, better equipped to face famine, disease, or the Lord's arbitrary demands. Beyond the shared labor, social life revolved around the rhythms of the agricultural year and the church calendar. Sundays were a day of rest from field work, dedicated to attending Mass at the village church. This was not just a religious obligation, but a vital social gathering, the one time the entire community assembled. After the service, news would be exchanged, gossip shared, and small disputes aired. The church porch often served as an informal court where minor grievances could be settled by the village elders or the reeve. Festivals and holy days provided much-needed breaks from the relentless grind. Harvest festivals, celebrating the successful bringing in of the crops, were occasions for rare feasts, singing and dancing. The winter solstice, Christmas, and Easter were marked by communal meals, perhaps a rare taste of roasted meat or stronger ale. These celebrations, though infrequent, were crucial for morale, offering moments of joy and release, reinforcing community bonds, and briefly lifting the burden of daily toil. Storytelling was a common evening pastime, with tales of saints, local legends, and humorous anecdotes passed down through generations, keeping oral traditions alive. Despite the hardships, there was a robust sense of belonging. Births, marriages, and deaths were communal affairs, marked by shared rituals and support. A wedding was a cause for celebration for all, a wake a time for collective mourning and remembrance. Life was short, often brutal, and individual survival was precarious. But the village offered a sense of continuity, a place within a larger, enduring tapestry. It was in these shared moments of struggle and celebration that the true spirit of medieval peasant life shone through, a testament to the enduring power of human connection in the face of adversity.
In a world fraught with uncertainty, where life hung by the thread of a successful harvest or the whim of a lord, faith in superstition provided solace, explanation, and a framework for understanding existence. For the 13th century peasant, the church was not just a building. It was the omnipresent spiritual and moral compass of their lives, deeply interwoven with every aspect of their daily routine, from birth to death. The village church, though often modest in size, was the most imposing structure in Oakhaven, a beacon of stability and divine order. Its bells marked the hours of the day and summoned the faithful to prayer. Mass on Sunday was mandatory, a solemn and often lengthy service conducted in Latin, a language most peasants did not understand. Yet they understood the rituals, the bowing, the crossing of oneself, the reverence for the sacred. The priest, often from a peasant background himself, served as a vital intermediary, interpreting divine will, administering sacraments, and offering spiritual guidance, as well as being a record keeper and sometimes an educator. Religion permeated their worldview. Every natural event, a good harvest, a drought, a sudden illness, was seen as a manifestation of God's will or divine displeasure. Saints were not abstract figures, but powerful intercessors, each with a specific patronage. Saint Francis for animals, Saint Roch for protection against plague, Saint Isidore for farmers. Peasants would offer prayers and small offerings to their patron saints, hoping to secure blessings and avert misfortune. Pilgrimages, though rare and arduous, were undertaken to holy shrines in search of miracles or forgiveness for sins. Alongside Orthodox Christian belief, ancient pagan superstitions lingered, often coexisting without contradiction. Folk magic, charms, and rituals were common, particularly for protecting livestock, ensuring fertility of the land, or warding off evil spirits believed to inhabit the forests and shadows. Wise women or cunning men, respected for their knowledge of herbs and old ways, were often consulted for healing or to break curses.
A horseshoe nailed above the door, a sprig of rowan tied to the cow's tail, or particular chants whispered over newly sown seeds were all part of the intricate tapestry of beliefs that guided their lives. It was a spirituality born of the earth, entwined with the seasons, and profoundly human in its hopes and fears. To paint medieval peasant life solely as one of unending misery would be to miss a fundamental truth. Human beings, even in the harshest conditions, find ways to carve out moments of joy, connection, and simple pleasure. These moments, though fleeting and hard-won, were the essential leavening in their otherwise arduous existence, providing the emotional sustenance needed to endure. Even in the drudgery of daily chores, there could be a rhythm, a shared satisfaction in a task completed. The camaraderie of working in the fields, sharing a laugh or a brief story with a neighbor, provided small pockets of human connection. For Ilara, the simple act of spinning wool with other women, their hands busy but their tongues free to share gossip and news, was a moment of fellowship. For Thomas, the satisfaction of a perfectly turned furrow or a thriving patch of wheat was a quiet triumph. Their pride in a productive harvest, though mostly for the Lord, also held a deep personal significance, a testament to their skill and perseverance. Children, despite their early initiation into labor, still found time for play. Sticks became swords, stones became counters for simple games, and the fields themselves were vast playgrounds for imagination. Their laughter, ringing through the village, was a reminder of life's perpetual renewal, a brief echo of carefree innocence before the weight of adulthood descended. The sight of their children healthy, even if thin, was a source of profound joy and hope for the future. Evenings, after the main meal, were a rare time for family. With the fire providing the only light, stories would be told, tales of old heroes, mischievous sprites, or moral fables passed down from one generation to the next. These oral traditions were not just entertainment, they were the repositories of village history, wisdom, and collective memory. A parent's gentle lullaby to a tired child, the shared warmth of bodies huddled together against the cold, the simple satisfaction of a full belly, these were the small, profound comforts that sustained them. The weekly market in the nearby town, for those few who could occasionally travel, was a vibrant spectacle, a kaleidoscope of sights, sounds, and smells, traders hawking their wares, exotic goods from distant lands, or at least the next county, musicians, and perhaps even a traveling minstrel or juggler. These rare excursions were intoxicating, a glimpse into a world beyond their village, providing stories to be recounted for weeks afterwards. Though their lives were circumscribed, the medieval peasant was not without spirit. They possessed a deep resilience, an ability to find beauty in the natural world, comfort in their community, and dignity in their daily struggle. Their joys were not grand, but they were real, rooted in the fundamental human need for connection, meaning, and survival. The life of a 13th-century peasant was not merely a day-to-day struggle, but an annual dance dictated by the relentless rhythm of the seasons. Their very existence was bound to the earth's cycles, each season bringing its own unique demands, fears, and hopes. Spring, heralded by the first thaw, brought a surge of frantic energy. The ground, finally pliable after winter's grip, demanded immediate attention. This was the time for plowing, harrowing, and sowing the spring crops, oats, barley, and legumes. Hope was in the air, a fragile optimism that this year's harvest might be bountiful, that the land would yield enough to feed their families and satisfy the moored. The days grew longer, but so too did the hours of relentless labor, from dawn till